there's a good book if you want to read a book that will help to show you what it looks like to live consistent with the truth. It's a book by Michael Singer called The Surrender Experiment. And he had this recognition of the truth in terms of the way things work, and so he decided he was just going to live as if that was true, regardless of what made sense or how he felt or any of the other stuff that went on. He was just going to live with the idea that that's true, and if that's true, then how would I be in situations that occur in my life? And so it's an interesting story because some pretty intense things happened in his life, and in the book he describes what it was like to go through those intense experiences with the point of view that thy will be done, that it's out of his hands. And one of the things that happened is he was the CEO of $1 billion corporation, and one day the federal agent, the FBI, walked in and claimed that he was a criminal and a fraud and this, that, and the other thing, and so he had to go through an ordeal about that. And so he describes in the book how he went through that ordeal with this perspective, with this way of being. And it's an interesting read, right? One of the things that happened is when the FBI came in and were taking all confiscating all the files in the business, he was offering them lunch, he was having these conversations with them, how are you today, and his staff was saying, what the hell are you doing? Why are you treating these people so nice? They're here to arrest you. And he said, that's just your point of view. So the thing about it is this, I was listening to Ramesh Balsekar today, and he reiterated his definition of enlightenment, which was different than the definitions that you get elsewhere. Maybe, but not really when you look at it, because the common definition of enlightenment that's understood is that you wake up and you realize who you are, right? You know that you're not the physical body, you're not the personality, and you realize that you're the awareness itself, and that awareness itself is actually God. So so that's the common understanding of enlightenment that goes around for a lot of people. And then his definition of enlightenment was when he saw clearly that there was no free will and everything is predetermined, and when he saw clearly that human beings cannot do anything, that they're not the doer, they don't do anything. When he saw that clearly, and when he saw it clearly, he began to look through that lens and began to relate and have an attitude towards life and towards other people with that point of view, he discovered peace of mind. And so he defined enlightenment as seeing the way it is. Now, so he defined enlightenment as seeing it the way it is, seeing that you are an instrument of God, that you can do nothing, you never have done anything, and you can't do anything. And everything is predestined, right? And because of that view, it is the case that you no longer experience any guilt or shame, right? Or responsibility for anything, because you're not the doer. You didn't do anything, you can't do anything, you won't do anything. And so right there you have, so what is it that people want? What is it that people are seeking? When you're a seeker, what are you seeking? Well, you want peace, don't you? You want peace of mind. You want to be able to relax. You want to be able to be at home with yourself, to be at ease with yourself. And that is provided when that's the view you have. And not only is that provided when that's the view you have, but it's also the case that if you really get in the world of it, if you really get in the world of that, then it's also the case that if it is the case that there's no free will, that doesn't just apply to you. That means that that's the case across the board. It means that no one does anything. No one does anything. Therefore, no one is guilty. No one ought to be shamed. No one should be punished. No one should be related to as if they perpetrated evil. That's an illusion. It's not the case. So even to get into the world of what I'm talking about right now is difficult, right? Because you're so conditioned to see yourself as the source and as the cause and as the doer and as the one that's responsible. It is so much the conditioning that we have, and not only is it the conditioning we have, but it is this idea that you're the doer and that you're responsible for your life and that your actions produce results is the anthem of our society, is it not? Yeah, it's the essence, it is your conditioning. It is the essence of your conditioning, right? That you learn that you're the doer, and so you have to do the right thing, and if you don't do the right thing, you'll be punished, according to society, right? You'll be punished if you don't do. If you do the right thing, you'll get rewards, right? Because you're the doer, right? So now you can see, this is the thing that you have to understand. And this is not easily seen because all this conditioning is happening to everybody and it looks like it's just reality, right? But the reality of it is that when you take this responsibility on from an innocent child to become a conditioned person, you're taking on the weight of the world. You literally are taking on a tremendous weight to carry on your shoulders, right? Because now you have to worry about what you do, don't you? You have to make sure you do the right thing and you don't do the wrong thing, right? And you've been conditioned to believe that what you have will be a function of what you do, so you better do the right thing to get what you want. The whole thing is built. The whole reality that people are living their lives on is built on the foundation that you can do, that you are a doer. You know, that you're responsible and that you're the cause of your behavior, the cause of your speaking, and therefore whatever works or doesn't work as a result of that has you to blame, has you to be responsible. This is a weight of responsibility psychologically and emotionally that you're carrying all the time. That's look, when you worry, isn't that what you're worrying about? When you're worrying, isn't that what you're worrying about? What's going to happen? Not just what's going to happen, what you're going to do and what other people are going to do. That's what you're worried about, right? Well, if this is true, you can take all that away. Now, if you take all that away, it's hard for you to even imagine what it would be like, isn't it? Yeah, because that's so foreign to your conditioning. It's so foreign to your conditioning. But you can, even if it's conceptually, you can understand, it makes sense, that if it's true that I didn't do anything and I can't do anything and everything is predetermined, and if that's true and if I live in that truth, then I can't have any shame or guilt. I can't. How can I? If I'm living in that reality, I can't have any shame or guilt because there's no reason to have any shame or guilt. I didn't do anything. And I can't have any pride either. I can't have any arrogance either. Right? Because I'm not responsible for what I did that was negative, and I'm not responsible for what I thought I did that was positive either. So there's no pride and there's no arrogance, right? And so what is there instead of pride and arrogance, right? What is there instead of pride and arrogance? Humility. Humility. Yeah, humility. Like you need to take your place now. You know, you need to give up the idea that you're the source, because that's what you're doing when you think you're the cause, right? And as long as you have that idea, as Ramesh Balsekar says, as long as you're living in that world and you have that idea, you're cut off from the truth and you're cut off from the source, because you're not the source. And if you consider yourself to be the source, you're in a delusional state and you're operating, and you're out of your league. You're out of your league because you're going to try and take responsibility for things you can't take responsibility for. And you can't take responsibility for anything. So if you can't really take responsibility for anything and you're going to take responsibility for everything, you have a burden that you're carrying on your shoulders that's unnecessary and untrue and unreal. And that burden can disappear if you see that it is not the case, it is not true, yeah. To function in this world, right? To function in this world, what world? The world of time and space, the world in which you think you're separate from me. Once that's happening, right, then you must believe that you are the doer, even though it's not true. You have to. And the proof of that is this. If you did get, and somebody asked Balsekar this very question, if you did get that you were that you weren't the source, you weren't the cause, and everything is predestined. If you did get that, and you were living from that truth, right? So then, what would you do? What would you do if I could snap my fingers and all of you would immediately know the truth that that you're not the source and you're not the doer and everything is predetermined? You would immediately just know that, right? What would you do next? Yeah, you would do the same thing as you've been doing, right? You know why? Because there's nothing else for you to do. You can't do anything else. You can't stop operating as if you're the doer. You can't stop operating as if you're a doer. Not in this situation in which being a doer is part of the situation you're in. You can't say, well, if there's predestination and then want to answer the question within the circumstances we find ourselves in, right? Which are not the actual circumstances, right? This is a particular situation that involves laws that take place in terms of how does it work for things to be manifest. There are certain laws involved in all that, right? So it's occurring like that. But the thing is this, it goes back to what I was saying earlier. If it's true that all there is consciousness, and if it's true that you're asking questions from the point of view that there are separate people, right, that you're already in the rabbit hole. But if you look at it and you see the truth of it, and you see that what appears to be separate people interacting is God interacting with God's self. If all there is consciousness, then the talker and the listener are both the same thing. If all there is consciousness, then ignorance and clarity, right, are part of the process that is occurring naturally. So you have to be willing to understand that this situation we find ourselves in is very challenging, and the only way out of it is to continually attempt to deepen your understanding of the truth of what's really happening here, which you're not going to get from just looking around at things, because that's a perception. That's not the truth, right? Which you're not going to get from just thinking about things, because that's an interpretation. That's not the truth. You're not going to get that from there. So you get that from the teaching, and then you do the practices, and as you learn and deepen the understandings and practice the practices, it starts to come together in the sense that, for example, one of the key understandings is the concept of no self, that there is no person, right? There's no such thing as a person, right? Now, that concept of no self is emphasized in terms of enlightenment when we say that I'm enlightened because I know who I am. If I know who I am, I know there's no such thing as a person, because what I know when I know who I am is that I'm awareness itself, right? And if that's true, if there's no person, right, if there's no person, then the idea that there's no doer has to be true, doesn't it? If there's no person, who's the doer, right? So that part of the teaching is emphasized, right? But what Balsekar said is, yeah, but you got to look at the implication of it. You got to see what the implication of it is and understand that if you live consistent with the truth, you're free from the suffering of expecting people to be different, expecting you to be different, expecting yourself to be responsible for everything that happens and therefore feel guilt or shame. So you through these teachings and understandings, you kind of get glimpses. You kind of see these things. And the thing about seeing these things is that you're not just seeing something that's a pipe dream. Because what do the teachers say? They say, look at the evidence. They say, look at the evidence. Because what's actually happening here is your conditioning is founded on beliefs that there's no evidence for. Your conditioning is founded on beliefs that there's no evidence for. There's no evidence for time. There's no evidence that there is a person or a personality. There's no evidence for it, right? There's no evidence that there's a doer. There's no evidence that you can do anything. And what Balsekar says is, check it out, look at it, examine it. That's why they have in these teachings the business of inquiry, the word inquiry, self-inquiry. What's it mean? Inquire into it. That's what it means. Inquire into it. Don't just take the things that you believe and keep running with them and then being mystified about why it doesn't work. It doesn't work because you're not operating in reality. It doesn't mean that because you accept these things, because you see the truth of these things, because you do the inquiry and you do see that the evidence is showing this to be the case, right? That doesn't mean that you're in the free. That doesn't mean that you're that it's over for you and that you don't have to deal with anything. No, because you still have a brain that's lying. You still have a brain that keeps generating this conditioned version of everything that's not the way things actually are. Even if you've seen the truth, that's the case. So what you have to do is you have to practice. And what are you doing? You're practicing looking from the view that the teachings tell us is the truth. You're practicing looking from the view that the teachings tell us is the truth. You're practicing experiencing being the awareness that's aware of the body breathing. And when you're practicing being the awareness that's aware of the body breathing, obviously you're not the body. That's inherent in that practice, right? So by practicing these things, the practice begins to shed light on the areas that are inconsistent with reality. The practice sheds light on the areas that are inconsistent with reality, so that if you find yourself in conflict with other human beings, and if you find yourself in conflict with the people closest to you, right, it's because you're practicing ignorance instead of practicing the truth. That's the only way it could be the case, because if you go back to the teachings, and the teachings say, right, that there is no free will and everything's predetermined, and that's not just true for you, but it's true for everybody. Therefore, you feel no guilt or shame. You don't carry the burden of responsibility, but you also don't see other people to be causing you suffering either. Right? So what do you have to do? You have to practice the way you would be if the way you would be was consistent with the truth. So what's that mean? It means that when the shit goes off in your head, right, you understand that's just the shit going off in your head. That's not the truth. And therefore you don't, because that's coming from your conditioning, right? So you don't follow it. You learn not to follow it. You practice paying attention. You practice noticing when the thought process is off the rails. You practice noticing when your expectations are unrealistic. You practice noticing when you're being in the world of suffering, when you're being in the world in which you blame other people for the way they are, and you blame yourself for the way you are, and you're suffering under the weight of all that. Yeah. Therefore, the appearance that you're living in, right, is a conditioned reality that you got brought into, that you now believe is true and is real, and therefore it affects you that way. And see, here's the thing. Don't expect yourself to get all this stuff. If you expect yourself to get all this stuff, you're going to be suffering a lot. Because you can't just get all this stuff. It's such a radically different reality from the one you've been conditioned in that you're struggling from the conditioned point of view to understand the reality, you see. It's not that you can't get it, but it's going to take time and practice and looking to see what the truth is for yourself. You have to look for yourself. You have to use it's like Belshazzar said, when he said, if I was going to recommend a practice, I would recommend once a day that you pick something that happened that you're absolutely clear that was a function of your actions. You did it. You made that happen. Pick something once a day. And then at night, when you're relaxing at home, go back and look at that thing and examine it closely. And if you do and you examine it closely, you can see that it's never the case. It's impossible for you to have done everything. If you look at what's actually happening, it's always the same. What is the evidence? The evidence says that your thinking occurs before you act. Always. Thinking occurs before action. Right? So that's what the evidence says. That's what's happening, right? And then the other thing we know about thinking is, what is thinking, right? Thinking is a process that draws upon the database of your experience from the day you were born. In memory, everything that's happened is in your memory. Thinking is drawing upon that database to bring up things that seem to be relevant to what's happening now, and the purpose of the program doing that is for your survival, to have the body survive and have you survive. right? So that's what's going on there. But that the thoughts that occur in your awareness are coming from a limited database, and you have no control over what happens with your thinking. You have no control. One of the things that is very early on that you learn in this process is that you're not the thinker. The evidence is there for you to see you're not the thinker. And since that database is a database you had no control over what got put into it, right? And you have no control over what comes out of it and produces and it appears as a thought. You have no control over any of that, right? And then your DNA is another possible source for that stuff to come from, right? But in none of that is there any free will. None of that do you have a choice about anything. So that's the evidence. The evidence says there's no free will. That's what's happening. It's not free will. You don't have a choice. At the same time that's the case, right? It must appear that you do for you to operate. It must appear for you to think that you have a choice and that you have free will for you to operate. But even that, as Balsekar says, is counterfeit. A thought, see, the idea that you think you have free will is nothing but that, an idea that you think you have free will. That's all it is. You don't have a hard time with the idea if I tell you that you're not beating your heart. That's pretty obvious, right? Yeah, but you have trouble accepting that when it comes to what you think and what you do, because you identify with that as you. You see, you identify with that as you, right? But it's really not any different than your heartbeat. The brain begins what they call readiness activity, what he called readiness. The brain's already in action to do something before you are aware you chose to do it. What more evidence do you want? You know, it's kind of like, this is the situation you find yourself in. You're kind of like a fundamentalist religious person, in a sense, because the way you relate to your conditioning is the way a fundamentalist religious person relates to their beliefs, right? You can't talk to them, right? The Bible tells me so, right? You can't talk to them. You behave the same way in relationship to your conditioning, don't you? You believe what's not true with the veracity of a fundamentalist religious person who believes what appears to be ridiculous stuff to other people, right? Yeah. And so when you're being looked at from an enlightened perspective, you appear to be believing ridiculous stuff and behaving in ridiculous ways, right? And they're patterns, so you keep doing that, right? And you keep being upset because it's not working. That's stupid. And even if you're told that, even if it's pointed out to you, even if you're given clear, irrefutable evidence that what you're doing can never work, you still do it. You still do it. Why do you still do it? I'll tell you why, right? This is a very important thing to understand. If you get this, it's one of these things that's a hinge that things turn on, right? In here, we talk about the idea that thinking is automatic, it's mechanical, right? It can be predicted in terms of the what's going to happen, right? Because it's all patterns, it's neural patterns and so forth. You know, when I used to work in the prison and I used to have to do evaluations on prisoners to give to the parole board, you know, psychological evaluations to get to the parole board to help them determine whether to release the guy. How am I supposed to do that? The only thing I have to go by is I go and look at the record. Here's a person that's been in and out of jail 20 times, right? What can I say other than he's probably coming back, right? What can I say other than that he's probably coming back, right? So that's what you're left with, right? And the thing is this, the hinge that this all turns on is this. We talk about thinking as mechanical, that just happens, right? And we talk about practicing being aware in such a way that you can see what the thoughts are. So that if you see the thoughts are unrealistic and crazy, you stop following them. You stop living consistent with those thoughts, right? Like that. But here's the deal. We talk about that, and when we talk about it conceptually and intellectually, you grasp it, don't you? Yeah, you grasp it. It makes sense. I mean, it's the same kind of thing. I can give you examples, many examples that show you that that's the case, right? However, As I also have said, when you get up from here and you leave this room and you walk out there, before you get to your car, you'll be back in the mistake. You'll be back in the mistake. What's the mistake? You think that you're the thinker. That's the mistake. You think that you're the thinker. And when you think that you're the thinker, the way you relate to thoughts is not like their thoughts. When you think that you're the thinker, the way you relate to thoughts is, that's me thinking, right? And me thinking, the way me thinking occurs for you is that I'm in the world, I see the world, right? I see what's happening, and when I think it, I'm just, saying what's happening, right? The thoughts are saying what's happening, right? But we find out through closer inspection that's not true. The thoughts are not saying what's happening. And so when you think you're thinking and you're just in that mode, you're relating to the thoughts as if the thoughts are true. As if it's reality. You're not reflecting on it. Do you understand? You're not reflecting on it. You're not looking at it like it's thinking. You're looking at it, no, that's just me thinking. That's the default state. Default state, no, that's just me thinking. And as I go through life and I'm thinking what? I'm thinking about what to do, right? I'm thinking about what I like and what I don't like. I'm thinking about what you're doing in relationship to what I'm doing, right? But all of that is interpretation, right? But I don't see it as interpretation when I'm thinking. I see it that that's what's happening. Do you understand the difference? If I see it as that's what's happening, now I'm in the world of that's what's happening, and the only thing I can do is deal with it from effect. Deal with it like it's happening to me, and therefore I have to deal with what's happening to me, and you're doing it to me, so I have to deal with you if you're doing it to me. And those are the thoughts that I'm thinking, but I'm not thinking I'm thinking the thoughts. I'm thinking that's true, right? And that's the pitfall right there. Yeah, but what allowed him to play tennis so effectively? Practice. Practice. And the practice isn't based on his theories. It's not based on what you believe. No, it's based on science. It's based on the ball coming at you at 130 miles an hour. That's what it's based on. If you want to hit that ball, you better practice, you see? And so it's the same thing. If you want to live a good life, if you want to live a life related to the truth, you have to practice, right? Because whenever you're not doing that, you're practicing the other thing. There's only two possibilities. So good luck with that.